Since it's recorded, Jackie, maybe you can start reading the comments and
Okay.
while we're waiting for people to come.
All right. Thank you for that. Edwin, I see you. Thank you for coming through. Pleasure to see you. And there was a reference, something that Shay referred to during his submission, a book that Edwin had also talked to me about. And he said, anyone who wants to know how ineffective aid can be should read Dead Aid by Dambisa Moyo. The book critiques the traditional model of international aid to African countries, arguing that it has often done more harm than good. Moyo suggests that large scale aid fosters dependency, corruption, and economic stagnation rather than sustainable growth. She advocates for alternative solutions like trade, investment, and market based policies to lift Africa out of poverty. That's fantastic. And this is something that Shay said as well. When Shay challenged us to Google problems of Africa, I went ahead and did so. And indeed, they say Africa faces many problems, including poverty, climate change, food insecurity, unemployment, corruption. Shay said some of those things, and he said they will be there. And what's the solution? Tread. Just as the book that Edwin is quoting, a book by Ndambisa Moyo, Dead Aid. She advocates for alternative solutions like trade, investment, and market based policies. And that's why, as Africa Today, we have AFCFTA, an initiative that we hope African countries will really, really rally support for, be right behind it, and make sure that AFCFTA works. There were lots of other comments. Let me go back to the timeline and go through those comments. I see Harry Joshua. Joshua said, there's only one way to African sovereignty and full independence. It's in the implementation of African Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. If we only store this document in papers and brag about it well, we'll keep repeating what we said. It's time now for implementation, not reading. All right? Not reading. Then I've got Diane says, Jackie, I always take it personal when I hear some people use that phrase. Beggars can't be choosers. Needing aid does not mean giving up dignity. Aid should be a tool for development, not a leash that controls us. Africa is rich in resources, talent, and innovation. We must position ourselves as partners, not beggars. The moment we accept that aid equals silence, we lose our voice in shaping our future. And I think the goal is not to reject aid, but to use it strategically while building an Africa that stands on its own. Thank you for that, Diane. Aid should be a tool for development, not a leash to control us. Ian says so. And he says, okay, so what happens when it becomes a leash to control us and yet you can't stand on your own, or rather, we can't stand on our own? Chris, you quoted Gatete, who reminded us that Rwanda is custodian of the R2P, responsibility to protect, which was endorsed at the UN World Summit in 2005, following a 2001 report by the International Commission on Intervention and State Sovereignty. Hilary Katumwa said aid is more political than it is for social and economic reasons. The best option we have is substituting aid with tourism. Substituting African aid with tourism offers a more sustainable path for the continent's economic growth. And then, yes, Bujingo, that's at G. Bemera, also read the book Dead Aid. Thank you for that. I saw another recommendation by Emmanuel Biedemariam, who said, Eritrea, the struggle is long and victory is certain. Thank you so much for those comments. Chris, those are some of the comments that we got from the previous conversation. As we start off, I hope that we will have more people come on. But also, we had already gone on for over an hour. Maybe it will be time for us to start edging towards the end. We've got Shay here with us. And Shay, you can see you made reference to that book. Edwin has made mention of it. And our friend from Ethiopia as well, talking about Dead Aid. Chris, over to you as I invite Shay as a speaker.
Yes, you can hear actually. I was going to say his name in your back. The little boy at airplane. So um, actually, say just mentioned something which is which concerns me as I'm someone in the diaspora, and um, I'm waiting for him to come back. Yeah, he's back. So say this diaspora giving opportunity, can it be, or shouldn't it be um, in how do I say this? Because it's a disorganized movement. How can we make sure it really replaces the aid and the bilateral aids, the bilateral finances, while it's still a lot of money, and it's actually more than direct, because, as you mentioned, most of the support to budget are being eaten in um, Brussels and Washington rather than in Kigali and Lagos. Can you take over from there? Do you get my question, by the way?
Maybe you want to summarize it again. I'm not sure I got it right. Come again with the question. Hi, Chris. Can you come again with the question?
Yes. You just mentioned about. Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. So you just mentioned about the diaspora being a force that can be used to leverage on the aid, to replace the aid and the bilateral supports. And I wanted to say, how can this be organized rather than being sporadic as we do it? Since it's more than, I mean, it's does more than than aid, because as you rightly mentioned, the bigger part of the aid stays in Washington and Brussels and other capitals. Is that clearer?
All right. Thank you very much. The word is politics. Okay. For some of us that are very, very vocal, we basically know we can't venture into politics. But basically, the word is politics. Diaspora needs to play the better politics as against just trying to also to earn a living abroad. Diaspora needs to be to come together when there is having any national celebration. They should be part of it and give their own suggestion. Okay, when there's okay, for instance, okay, there are international organization that usually employs people for Africa from the World Bank, those kind of organization. So diaspora needs to stop looking away from those kind of organization and be part and parcel of it, because when policies are being made, they have a way of influencing what belongs to Africa in those kind of space. For instance, the current DG of World Trade, is it World Trade Center? What do they call it? International Trade Organization, right? So it's Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala in Nigeria. So now, if certain thing that has to do with trade about Africa is being played in that kind of in that kind of institution, I would expect anything that will have to do with Africa, anything that will have to do with our own country, to be of interest to her. And even if you can't totally influence such, she'll be able to escalate such to our people back home. So diaspora from coming to they need to start playing the global politics. They need to start looking for jobs, or they need to start looking for influence within those global multilateral organizations, the UN, the World Trade, International Trade Organization, the regional blocks. Those organizations that are responsible for global events, global institution, global politics. They need to our diaspora need to start looking at the political influence in those space. That is one. Then secondly, Chamber of Commerce. Chamber of Commerce is also currently in Kigali. Okay, of Commerce to do with our own country, to be of interest to her. And even if you can't totally influence such, she'll be able to, escalate such to our people back home. So diaspora from coming to, they need to start playing the global politics. They need to start looking for jobs, or they need to start looking for influence within those global multilateral organizations, the UN, the World Trade, International Trade Organization, the regional blocs, those organizations that are responsible for global events, global institution, global politics, they need to, our diaspora need to start, looking at the political influence in those space. That is one. Then secondly, Chamber of Commerce. Chamber of Commerce is also one of the things that I think the diaspora need to start looking at. Okay, for instance, you see Rwanda, UK Chamber of Commerce currently in Kigali. Okay, so the diaspora needs to register for such and be part of it, because there's what you can't do as a single person, you can do it as a collective. Okay, so the diaspora needs to position themselves in those multilateral organizations, those organizations that are involved in things that really affect the continent. Is very, very key. For one, I believe so much in empowering people, believe so much in empowering a younger generation. Okay, so when things that needs to when the continent needs powerful voice, okay, it is only those that you have empowered as back home that will be able to represent you. The current AU, the newly elected AU chairperson used to be the foreign affairs minister in what's the country again? In Djibouti. Okay. Now the man has been able to build some reputation to garner such a vote. So there's some political influence to that. But the fact remains that the guy has been around the politics, so he's able to clinch that particular position. So if at the peak of AU conversation, for instance, if anything is going to be talked about Djibouti, by the way, I mean, you will hardly hear anything about Djibouti as an African. The only thing, basically for me, the only thing you possibly know about Djibouti is the fact that they have a lot of foreign-based military in Djibouti. I'm not sure anything that has to do with commerce, anything that has to do with global politics, anything that has to do with major tourism, okay, happens in Djibouti the way it happens in Kenya or in Rwanda. But the man has been the country has been able to use the influence of the man as a former foreign minister to achieve being the new UN the new African Union chairperson. So those are some of the things that we need to be looking at. We need to make our diaspora pay the real politics. Everything is about politics. If it's just about playing the right politics. If you can't play the right politics as an African, if you can't play the right politics, we will definitely always be shortchanged. When sanction comes, it will lie on it will be on us. So we need to start playing the right politics. And for context, okay, like I used to tell people, there's difference between politics and morality. If you want to play politics, your morals doesn't need to be too up there. It's either you're a moral person and you stay moral. But if you want to join politics, what the local politics, you just have to play the way it is played. Okay, as far as you're not killing people, you're not unliving people, you're doing what you're supposed to do. So that's what I need. For not the way politics will definitely be church change. People will church change us. People. I mean, people will look at they continue to look at the continent as a dumping ground. Okay, as a dumping ground, and that's it. So we need to play. We need to start playing the right politics in the global space. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that, Shay. Earlier on, and that was just before Chris came in, I was asking you, since you have done business in several African countries, when you go in there and discuss business, do you see the sense that this is a people that are ready to move on? Are they people that want to cut this bondage? Do you see those you interact with, the countries that you go to, do you see a desire in them to sustain this momentum? If Rwanda is a small country saying we can say no to aid, we can come up with a Chiro fund and we'll try and help ourselves. Jiringa, that is one cow per family. A cow is given to a family. They will have milk, but then also be able to give a cow to another family. We've got mutual descent in such initiatives by a small country like Rwanda. Do you get the sense that other countries want to carry on with this, or do they look comfortable with the status quo?
So you are asking if with my experience within the continent as somebody doing business, you are asking if how excited Africans are for trade. Is that the question?
No, if you get the sense that they are excited to for intra-trade, are they interested in intra-trade? Do you see them embracing it? Do you see them embracing AFCFTA, or do you see some sense of division? Are we still divided and prefer to go behind the backs of our fellow African countries and strike deals on our own, or are we ready to move on, break this bondage, start a trend that will favor Africa as opposed to the old system that has been a disadvantage to us?
Okay. This is a this is a very touching one. So I want to be sure that I got it correctly. If your question is if I see African embracing intra-African trade, and are they very excited about it, and are they willing to do it, right?
Yes.
Okay. Unfortunately, yeah, and this is actually one of the things that really, I'm very very passionate about. Unfortunately, we are not yet so wired to think interconnectedness of Africa as a continent. Everybody is still just doing its own thing. Like I used to ask people in privately that it's easier for you to see companies like KPMG from Europe in a lot of African countries. It's easier for you to see Procter and Gamble from Europe in Rwanda, that is also operating in Burundi, also operating in Malawi, operating in even within just East Africa, Tanzania. It's a bit difficult to see Africa trying to set up business within their country and as individual. We're still thinking as think the way we're wired, everybody wants to protect its own. Basically, that's the way everybody is wired. We want to protect our own. Um, I'm born in Kenya, so Kenya is equals to the world. I'm a Tanzanian, so Tanzania is the best place on earth. I want to live in Tanzania. I want to do business in Tanzania, and I don't want to move within. I don't want to move past Tanzania. Unfortunately, what's the implication of that is that if you have the ability, you are already limiting the prospects of a global global business that you're doing, because every business have a global viewpoint. Okay, there's basically no difference between the accounting practice in Rwanda an accounting practice in Singapore, okay, as a service. There's basically nothing different between the wheat that is being consumed in Nakuru in Kenya and the wheat that is being consumed in Nepal. Okay, so basically the same agricultural products. That's what I'm saying. So, and the best thing that will happen to any business is to think beyond, beyond the now. Is to think beyond the little population that we have in each of our country. Is to think global. Okay, you have to just think global, basically. So, are people embracing intra-African trade? Are people, the businesses that I've interacted with, are not? Although, I mean, people that are close to me that I've interacted with in each of those countries that I've been to, okay, that are doing business, little businesses, is once we start having a conversation, I like to tell them that why not think to add it to the next border. Okay, if you're in Kigali, I mean, are you thinking of Kampala? Are you thinking about the if you're selling something in Kigali? Are you also thinking about the other population close by in Kampala? Okay, you understand? And the influence of thinking that in that mindset is that you have a larger market now. Okay, and you will learn a lot of certain things that are different from where you're coming from. Okay, you learn a lot of culture and you have a much more globalized product and services. Let me give you a typical example. Okay, and I will not shy away from also taking our government to be talking about the irresponsibility, so to say, of some of our government policy. Okay, and because you cannot take away the fact that businesses are run based on government established policies. So if individual government doesn't have a policy to have, that is positive to business, the business will definitely suffer. Let me give you a typical example. It's easier for you to start a business in Rwanda today, and the next day you open accounts in Rwanda, even the same day, if possible. Okay, you open a bank account in Rwanda. That is not the case in Tanzania. Okay, as a foreigner, for instance, I'm talking about as a foreigner. In Tanzania, you have a business today. You need like a foreign local partner to help you to open an account and operate the account, joint account with you, pending when you get pending when you get a what they call business permit. Okay, and how does that business permit come? The business permit come like maybe after a resident permit rather, after like maybe 3 months thereabouts. Okay, so those time that's as little as that time could be, that is waste of time, waste of people's time. Okay, especially investors that are really not interested in living there. They just want to establish business, they want to set up business, they want to set up their team and start to operate their business. Okay, they don't want impediment, they don't want bottleneck, bureaucracy. They just want to start and run. Okay, so governments are not embracing it, first of all, in terms of intra-African trade. A lot of African governments are still sleeping on this. I can mention African governments that are sleeping on it. Even Ghana, back in West Africa, is still sleeping on this. They need to get integrated. They need to they want to listen. Ghana, for instance, want to listen to only investor like Dangote that has a lot of money. Because as an investor, let's say Jackie now, you want to go set up a business of media in Ghana. The government of Ghana will be telling you that you need about $500,000 to set up that your business. Okay, I'm not kidding. This is what is happening. And guess what? Ghana is the HQ for AFCFTA. So you could see policy inconsistency. You could see leaders that are not serious. They say it with the mouth, but the practice is something else. Okay, that is that. So the private sector, I think the private sector need more orientation. Okay, in terms of how they embrace it, the private sector need more orientation, because the fact is that, okay, you need a lot of local businesses that are ready to be global. If a business, let's say a Yange water in Rwanda is able to go to Uganda to do the same business, is repatriating money back home, and the money that is repatriating back home is USD, foreign currency, and all that. That has a way of boosting the economy. So if that will boost the economy, the issue of the issue of trade aid, when it comes, it comes. When it doesn't come, it doesn't really affect anybody because you have people, you have inflow of local and international, international services. Your countrymen are doing well within the region, and they could transfer their return back home. Okay, so from the individual viewpoint, I think there's still need for orientation. Okay, we still practice our individualistic kind of business. We are yet to understand the fact that the world is actually a global village. Why KPMG is in every country of the world, most of the country of the world, and it's not from, at least in most of the part of Africa, KPMG works with government. These are companies that are not originally from Africa, but they are doing excellently well. So African businesses too need to start, having a strategy to make sure that they can spread within, and it's easy. It's not something that it's adult. It's anybody can do it. The main thing is do it legally. Okay, you get so. There's still need for a lot of orientation from the private sector. Okay, they didn't. I mean, private sector basically need to have more bolder dream than just doing individualistic business. Okay, then the government, I think they just need to play, to act the talk. Okay, they should stop looking for to they stop making policy statements. They need to act the talk. You come up with policies that really facilitate trade. Okay, and once that is done, so it's just the connecting, the orientation from the government, the orientation from the private sector, and working the talk by the political office holder. I think that's it for me.
Thank you very much. Say, we could have had a longer conversation around this business. Maybe, like a request from you that we have another conversation, say around intra-African business.
Yeah, we should have that, Chris. I agree.
Because I have a lot of comment, but we're on a second hour, and people are probably getting tired. Those are new audience. So I mean, with your permission, Jackie, we can get people. Espoir was here before. He requested to say something on aid, and then Chris. Is it? Yeah, I'm calling him Chris because I know him. Dawarasa. Gatete, do you want to say something before that, or is that you okay? Since you are our guest. Okay.
I am good.
So,
Unless there's a question for me, I'm good. I think my colleague
Hello.
has
Okay.
that we needed to say. I'm good. I'm
Yeah.
waiting for questions.
Thank you very much. Espoir, can you come up and share your thoughts on aid? And if you have a question or two, please be fast because we didn't expect to do a longer time for this question. Thank you. Espoir, are you there? Espoir?
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry. I was on mute. What I'm trying to say is, one of my favorite books written by African was Dead Ed. Dead Ed by Ndombasa Ngoyo. She wrote about the condition of the end. To be frankly honest, as African, as I'm speaking as a Congolese, We shouldn't need no aid. Recently, we saw the dispute between the Kinshasa regime and the and the and the Swiss people. Swiss they gave us $300 million per year, but we spend no $300,000 per year, not a million. But we spend 1 day. Our diplomatics spend $500,000 just in hotels. By the end of their trips, it was over $1 million. My brother, do we need a Swiss or does the Swiss need us? That's the question we should ask ourselves. The condition aid where Ndombasa she spoke about, when they give us aid and they orient us how to use it, that's a slave. That's a slavery in my opinion. African part in the world, the Western aid and the sanctions. We must only these sanctions and aid only apply to the Africans. When it comes to even like the ICC, why does it not apply to other countries? But as Africans, only our sons are in Hague. But where is everybody else? Where is everybody else? Who invaded countries and then they realized it was a mistake, there was no mass destruction. So I think African we must wake up. We must wake up. I know it's not a part of the topic. The humiliation of Zelensky in the White House here, it should teach us a lesson. We must fight for ourselves. We should not expect anybody else to fight our fight. I am my mic. Thank you so much for giving me this time. Dead yet we don't need it. African we can do trade among each other. We can do a lot of things. We don't need the Western. Actually, they need us more than we needed them. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Espoir. No question. Take over on Tavares. You there, Chris? The mic is closed. Go on, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, and I'm very happy to have you around on the same space with Jackie, given
Thank you.
your story together.
So I think I've been having connection issues, but I like the topic first and foremost. It's a very timely topic given the situation that Africa is in. And I'd say what Seyi said, part of what he said, I definitely agree with. But I would love to start off with admitting the fact that Africa is a sleeping giant. Africa is a sleeping giant that needs to wake up because we've been so, should I say, dependent on Western aid that we think we cannot survive without it. And yet, when you really look at the world affairs in general, most of the international community, quote unquote, is actually dependent on Africa. And if you analyze aid, it is actually a trap in disguise, sort of like a snare that entraps us and keeps us in that position of always begging and always looking up to the Western world and putting us in a victim position, putting us in victimhood. So I'd say this is a chance for Africa to wake up. It's a chance for Africa to become aware of its value and to take up its position, its rightful place in global affairs. But of course, all of this will come about after Africans themselves get to a point where we put our differences aside, and this is, of course, on all levels, from the political level down to the community level, where we no longer see and uphold our differences, but where we rather uphold what unifies us, what makes us one. Africa has everything we need to thrive. Africa, to me, is the mother of the world. And whether in terms of philosophy, whether in terms of mineral riches, you name it.
Chris, let me stop you a little bit. But Ed is there. Like let's be honest with ourselves. Ed is there. It's even bigger in countries that we believe are richer, like South Africa, Nigeria. I mentioned it. What do we do to get how do we navigate Ed away from it? Concrete ideas on how to get out of that. And what about what's behind it? What about the sanctions and all the stuff?
That's a very good question, Chris. First and foremost, I'd give an example of what Sei mentioned, which is creating an environment that is easier for us to do business with each other, whereby it's not just one side of Africa that has created a very easy, or should I say, has simplified the process of starting up a business and conducting it, the process of investment. But it should be a collective effort where we create ease for business among each other. Because what we don't have in Rwanda, Nigeria has, or Ghana has, or South Africa, or even Kenya and Tanzania. So we just need to tweak a few things to make things right, if I'd say. But it is a process, and it takes a political will. And of course, our leaders have to lead us through this entire process. It will take time. It will take time. This is the beginning of a new awakening for Africa. For Africa to realize the potential that has been lying dormant all these ages. I don't know if I've answered your question, Chris, to your satisfaction, but I think I've just pointed out a few, which is ease of doing business with each other, because aid is there, first and foremost, because we were told, or we are already used to aid from the moment where we got our independence from the colonizers.
Thank you,
for them
Chris.
to sort of.
Yeah, let's get
Yes.
Gatete back in, and then I am. Gatete. Karibu.
Thank you.
Asante, I would like to react to this, and I would like to say this slowly so that everybody understands. It's very important that I say it slowly for everyone to understand. For just over 50 years, aid that has been given to Africa has never exceeded 2% of our GDP. I repeat, kabiri kwijana, 2%. Capital flight, that means money that flees, I don't know how you say it, money that outflows out of Africa, is 2 trillion for the same period of time. 2 trillion.
Is it stolen or just being taken away with business?
It is
Or
stolen.
everything
It
together?
is for illegitimate
Okay.
reason. It is the 4 billion of Mobutu money in Switzerland that never came back. It is the billions that Tshisekedi is now stashing away somewhere. It is 2 trillion for the same period. I want this to be clear. Now, I also want to tell you, the private wealth of Africans held offshore, that means money that is not stolen, that is legitimately placed outside of the African continent, is 2.5 trillion. Today, it was 2.5 trillion about 2018. Today, it's about 3 trillion African capital that is housed outside of Africa. Aid is 2% of Africa's GDP. I want to clarify those 3 points. People who talk about aid are the same people who talk about migration. Europe is in desperate need of human power, but it keeps talking about migration and migration of Africans going there. They expel 10 black people and sign a contract with Kenya to import 1,000. They expel 20 in front of cameras, then they let in 1 million Syrians to come to Germany. The truth and what is reported have nothing to do with each other. Aid is trivial, insignificant on the African continent. I repeat, insignificant. Obviously, just like you individually have a budget, think of 2% of your money and think about how much headache would that give you if you misplaced it and lost it on the street. 2%. Aid has never gone above that since our independence in the 60s. 2% of our GDP. In fact, Africa is a net creditor of the rest of the world because Africa has 2 trillion of money for the same period of 50 years that has been going out illegitimately, that will be stolen from Africa, and almost 3 trillion that of African money that is held in Swiss bank, American bank, European banks, and so on. If we said today everyone repatriates their money, white people, European, Western people keep their money, and we Africans collect all our money that is in the West, that which is legitimate and that which is illegitimate will have the budget of France or of the UK of money that is housed offshore, overseas, legitimately or otherwise. So to recap, we have about 5 trillion of African money that is overseas. This money, if repatriated to Africa, this would actually shake some economies in the West. Aid, on the other hand, in Africa is 2%. This must be imprinted on every African head, because then perhaps it is going to start to begin to free people's minds. Aid is trivial, and in fact, in this day and age, aid is what they call a boomerang sanction. Aid sanctions and aid cuts are what they call boomerang sanctions. For instance, nobody has to teach me LGBTQ every day anymore now that USAID or some other people used to give us this money have closed. Now I can go about in the world and prophesy about polygamy, about not having to go to Western religions, or about my culture, my language, and so on, because I don't receive anyone giving me money to prophesy Western values. Nobody's going to have to teach me the history of, they call it the history of World War I and World War II in Europe. Nobody has to teach me that anymore, because now the apostles of who come to me to try to save me and civilize me and discover me will have no say. They will have no sway over me. It's Thomas Sankara who said, "He who doesn't feed you can demand nothing from you." It is very important that everyone that is on this forum today understands that aid represents 2%, has never gone above 2% of Africa's GDP. Kabiri, 2%. And on the other hand, the Western world holds about 5 trillion of our money. Sankara, again, was complaining about when you look at the loans that we get, the principal that we get, and the interest that we pay over that principal and how it's restructured through the years and so on, you will find that we pay more, double, triple. In Rwanda, there is a law that interest rates cannot go beyond the principal, cannot go beyond 100% of the principal. That's not the same with loans, because loans, they go triple, quadruple of the money. You remain indebted for life. On the other hand, remember, one of the reasons we use the United States dollar as a global currency, that we trade our natural resources in United States dollars, is because they still have this influence on us. Gaddafi was killed because he wanted to create an African currency, because we are the custodians of most of the resources that the world needs, which means we export our resources in a currency which we do not control, currency which is devalued and revalued and rebased based on the interest of those who use it to buy our resources. If tomorrow we wake up, we create the Afra, which is an African, let's say, African currency, and we ask everyone in the world if they need oil from Algeria, if they need coltan from DRC and from Rwanda, if they need phosphate from Morocco, they must buy it in the Afran. They will have a currency that we control. They will come here crawling, asking us to help. If you look at the influx and outflux of money of United States dollars between Africa and the rest of the world, Africa is a net creditor. Do you understand that? I want everybody to understand that. I could never emphasize it enough. The moment you do, then what you have to now discuss is how can we consolidate and safeguard each other, stop fighting with each other, and secure ourselves. Because the moment I start putting in action what I'm telling you now, I'll be eliminated tomorrow. The question we should be discussing is what lessons, what can we do, like they've done in the 3 Sahel countries, but they remain vulnerable. What can we do to consolidate a continental army, to consolidate a continental stability, then to establish a consolidated currency in which everyone who wants to buy our natural resources must buy them in. The fact that they buy them in the United States dollars put us at a net disadvantage. So We accept it because we are at no conflict with no one. We do not. I do not, as a Pan-African, I do not see myself in a binary situation of in a zero-sum game of us against them. There's no such thing as them. There's no such thing as us. Obviously, having been born a refugee, I understand that there's no such thing as us and there's no such thing as them. We have friends from Australia to America to France to my sister here who is even from Yugoslavia. I can see her on the platform. We have friends from all corners of the world. So I do not consider Africa to be in conflict with anyone. Colonization is over. Neocolonization is something that we invite. It's not something that is imposed on us. When Tshisekedi boycotts conferences at the African Union meeting where they're discussing the DRC and prefers to go to Munich where he criticized Africans, I do not think that neocolonization is something that was imposed upon him. It's something that is within his head. When his Minister of Foreign Affairs criticizes the non-permanent member of the UN Security Council right during the UN Security Council in which they are discussing Africa, just because said members of the African continent have refused to encourage sanctions on a fellow African country, I do not think that Pan-Africanism is us against them. There's no such thing as us against them. However, just so you know, we send more money to the West than they send to Africa. There's more African money in United States dollars in the West that is in Africa. Aid represents 2%, has never gone above 2% of our GDP. The moment you understand that, then you can rationalize the rest of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Gatete. And there's something also I want to add to that what you just said. When I think it's President Ruto who mentioned it, or Kagame, when a Rwandan person buys something from Kenya or a Kenyan buy from Rwanda, the transaction gets reconciliated in New York, which is in itself a nonsense. We can't just transact from Rwandan francs to Kenyan shillings. And this is something we need to talk about. And as you're saying, it might be dangerous to attack it like that. Maybe we need another space to talk about transaction, as I said. But yeah, thank you for giving us this figure. I didn't know it was that little, 2%, given the noise that it makes. Maybe because
You made it seem very insignificant.
It's insignificant, but Jackie, this is what I've been always saying. Someone who has the media can tell you, can make something big.
Excuse me to interject. The first thing that the first tool of oppression is denial of information. For example, one of the reasons I was excited to come on this talk is because when Britain went out there, drummed up that they have suspended foreign aid to Rwanda, yet they have given zero money to Rwanda this year. How can you claim that you have stopped your aid to a country, yet you have not given them a single coin?
That's very shameless.
Belgium, which was saying that, Rwanda sanctioned us, but we were in the process of reviewing our aid. Belgium has given budget support of $5 million this year. $5 million. So the first thing that is important on this platform, I bet many people here did not understand that aid represented only 2%. That's why people say, we African live off of it. Because every day, every newspaper hammers down the same message: aid to Africa. Every politician in the West, before they speak of aid, they call all the media and stand up and speak in grand phrases of English, saying how they are helping Africans. It is most of the money goes to advertise the aid itself than to actually help the people. Most of the money that is in Rwanda comes from international institutions, IMF, World Bank, Afrexim Bank, and so on. And those banks, we have a stake. We are shareholders. We have a say in those banks. So it is also our banks. Unless you want to tell me that the UN does not belong to Africans, that the World Bank does not belong to Africans, that the IMF does not belong to Africans. If you say that, then you are questioning the very foundation of the international systems. Otherwise, the most of the money that we get that is not directly generated from Rwandan taxpayers comes from financial institutions. So we go to the market. We have a bond that every time we launch a bond, it is oversubscribed. That tells you that we are credible, that we manage our debt, that our debt is always below 70% of the budget. Some countries like Japan have racked up their national debt to 200%. Our debt is never goes above. This year it was the highest. It went up to 70% of the budget, and most of these are concessional loans, and you pay them over time. And indeed, concessional loans. And let me tell you something else you people did not know. These rating agencies that you hear about, Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch, and so on, their purpose is to keep the African credit rating quite low, so that when we borrow at higher interest rates. I'll give you an example. Do you remember when most of the countries actually do this as a Bank Lambert? For those who live in Kigali, they understand what Bank Lambert means. People go and borrow at 1% and come and lend it to you at 6%, and they live off of your back and off of your effort. We have some of the loans that we received. We used to receive bilateral loans. The same bilateral loans were borrowed by other countries. Just because their skins are lighter than yours, they will borrow money at a lower interest rate, 1%, 0.5%, 0.7%. They will come and give you the money at 4%. And then they can live off of you. This is true for most of African countries. If we were to unpack the financial system and the money flows and the aid, it would be a bombshell. Some countries, I can't confirm this, but you have all heard of colonial taxes that were paid by countries in West Africa. Gabon, Cameroon, and some of these countries, their biggest ports are managed by Bolloré and other French companies. French companies have first right of refusal on every export of natural resources. French companies have the first right of refusal of every public tender that these countries launch. Do you understand what first right of refusal is? Is before anyone else can bid, they ask the French, are you interested? If after France has said, no, we don't feel like investing in that sector, that's when they open the tender to international companies. Do you understand that? The moment you switch that off, 50 biggest French companies go bankrupt. Like there's a testimony of the port of Libreville, I think. They launched a tender, and the new director who was coming from of the port, who was coming from a school in America, in a business school, he opened the tender internationally. Someone won it, I think a Korean company and so on. Francois Mitterrand flew to the country, had a meeting with the president, took a plane, went back. The tender was cancelled, the contract was cancelled, it was awarded to Bolloré, just like that. So if you want to understand who aids whom, this conversation that of self-pity parade that Africans have, this should be the self-pity parades that should be held in American and European capitals. Because the beggar in this story is not the African. I refuse to say that. I can show you exactly how the money, for example, I can show you companies based in Zurich, based in New York, based in London and in Paris, whose biggest turnover is money made in Africa. I can show you. If I think I need to write and unpack this and explain it to you in a very simple language.
I was going to suggest that because unfortunately we don't have enough time here. It's a little bit late.
My point to the aid is that don't worry. In fact, it is insignificant. I mean, we've been receiving it for 60 years. Which country do you know has actually developed thanks to aid? Do you know any country in the world? I mean,
not really. I actually got to Tanzania. I got to Tanzania and I saw their train. Sorry, Gatete. I went to Tanzania and saw their train. And when I told someone that Tanzania is developing high-speed train, he said Chinese are buying them. I said, at least they have trains. For us, we haven't seen anything.
And who is telling us that Chinese are buying us?
Europeans, of course, the same people. So let's get other people on board. We can have this discussion and spend the night over here. If you allow, please. Can we? Can you just conclude your sentence in
Yes,
1 second and get
we can go
Ian?
ahead with the rest, Chris. Then Gateta will come back in because we'll hear from him at the end of the space, so we can have the other speakers.
So we have Ian and then Bojan.
You want us to start with Ian? Okay, fine. Ian, then Bojana.
Then Ian was here before. Ian, can anyone hear him? Jackie, can you hear Ian?
I can't hear him. In fact, he's fallen off. Ian isn't there. Oh, wait. No, he's there. He must be struggling with the network. Ian, have you unmuted your mic? Or rather, can you unmute your mic?
Indeed, the mic is unmuted, but he is not speaking. So he's okay. So we'll get Bojana and then comes back.
Yes, hello everybody. Thank you for organizing this space. I think the most important things were actually said, and I completely agree with Gatete and Shay. At least I was able to hear their intervention. One of the things I wanted to follow up on Gatete, what he said, is exactly that aid in fact sustains the West and Western agencies more than Africa. And one of the main reason is when you look at the programs that they put in place that are mainly based on either pushing for their political agenda or economic agenda, it's never really related to what people need. I think for me, there are several examples. One of the examples I could give is Senegal, for having lived there for 5 years, where you can see that USAID has been there for at least 2.5 decades, which you would even wonder, like, if they're there to solve problems, how come they're there for so long? But you could see, for example, the programs that they would be pushing for in Senegal is family planning. Now, Senegal is a Muslim country. Family planning is either managed by people themselves in the ways that they manage it. But in any case, this kind of programs was really not something that Senegal needed. Another example was, for example, malaria, which for a long time was not an issue in Senegal. So they would be pushing forward for years a program that didn't necessarily have a need to be there. In addition to that, to go back to how much money is spent, is devoted to actually aid, and how much money is devoted to the operations of the NGOs. Just think about the lifestyle of these expats. In Senegal, any expat working for USAID or any other NGO has at least housing that is provided, several tickets per year for the entire family, international schools that are paid for. To give you an example, one student at the International School of Dakar, for one student, K through 12, would be so secondary school and primary school would be $30,000 per year. They also have house or home personnel, nannies, drivers, security guards. This is the kind of lifestyle that they do not have in the West. In the West, if they do live in New York or Boston or anywhere else, they're paying high prices for their housing. And yes, they maybe have a dishwasher, but an electric dishwasher, but they're not having all of this help themselves if they're in the West. So for them, it's extremely beneficial to be in Africa first for the lifestyle. But also, again, imagine in terms of operations, having these offices there, having the type of equipment that they need to be able to run their NGOs. It's probably, I don't know if it's 2%, as Gatete says, but I'm sure that they're using at least 90 or 80 to 90% just to run the organization and to pay their salaries, which means less than 10% is given for actual aid, and again, for programs that are not designed to actually help Africans who themselves have certain needs. So I do want to say that aid does sustain the West more than it sustains Africa. And then again, aid is the opposite of development. Sorry. So to me, it's one of the main impediments to sustainable development, and therefore it's an impediment to decolonization. If Africa has made the choice to gain its independence, or for African countries to gain their independence and to decolonize, aid is one of the main impediments to that. So if African countries are ready to break away from colonization, they need to first break away from that kind of dependence. And like I said, it's an interdependence. The West becomes dependent on aid. An example I could give is really my recent trip to Goma. Goma has every single service stamped by MONUSCO, by MSF, by all those organizations. So imagine now that the IDP camps have been, emptied, that people are going back home. These NGOs have nothing else to do, and they have to go back home. So basically, we're talking about unemployment for these people. So for them to be able to continue working, they need to sustain the need, which means that aid is really not there to help those that they're saying they're helping, but it's to sustain them. There's also too much of, I don't know if I can call it, pornography of NGOs. One example is when we were in Goma, they were actually burying the bodies that were collected after the fight that took place between the FRDC, or the Kinshasa coalition, and M23, and the Red Cross were actually burying those bodies in the middle of the city, which to me doesn't really make sense. If, first of all, the look of it is already extremely difficult and tragic, but also it's a big show. It's a spectacle. The smell, and people are just walking by and seeing these bodies being buried, and the Red Cross people with their suits and so on. It's a lot of spectacle when they could just step out of the city and bury people in a different place. Another example of how aid is not effective in delivering any type of aid, is the Mukwege Foundation, or the business that Mukwege has done around sexual violence, to go back to the region. Mukwege knows perfectly well who's responsible for the sexual violence in Eastern DRC. There are enough studies that show that those who are responsible of this violence are mainly people who live in the areas where the women that are being raped live. The majority of them are actually FRDC soldiers, and the National Army of Congo, but also of DRC, but also the police. So they're the principal perpetrators of rape in Eastern DRC. For many reasons, as we know, they're underpaid. Their situation, I'm not justifying, but I'm saying that the entire situation there is tragic. So armed groups are not the main perpetrators of rape in Eastern DRC, which is very important to know, despite the fact that Mukwege is calling it a weapon of war, which is completely untrue. But of course, for Mukwege to be able to sustain his own business, he needs to continue saying that there's a need. Actually, in his memoir, in his book, he does at some point catch someone who raped a woman that he was taking care of, and he lets him go. And he explains how, well, he's also a victim. And so I thought that, I was trying to understand his plight, and so on and so forth. So there is complete impunity when it comes to prosecuting these people. So it becomes a self-sustaining business. So also, I think I want to come back quickly to what Shay was talking about earlier. self-interest is very important for African countries to develop. I'm going to use an example that is outside of Africa. Gatete mentioned earlier that I was from former Yugoslavia. Former Yugoslavia was basically the country that initiated the non-alignment movement. So during the Cold War, it was the only country, or one of the, at least the only country in Europe that was not aligned, sorry, to either Eastern or Western Bloc. And what our former leader at the time, Josip Broz Tito, put in place is somewhat of what we call market socialism, which is we basically had all services that were free and accessible. To give you an example, my mom had a year of birth leave, or maternity leave, sorry, paid for. And we were exporting goods. One of the main goods that we were exporting was refined wood. So we were making furniture. We had very good quality furniture that we were exporting all over the world. I actually found some in the US when I came here, some of that furniture that we were making there. So we really had at least 30 years of development and services that were accessible to everybody. And the reason being because we refused to be, managed by an external force, whether it was for our political choices or our economic choices. So when it comes to Africa, I think that it's very important that I think Rwanda is a very good example of how, after the genocide, Rwanda decided to take things into its hands. Given the history of how the international community, turned around and didn't do anything during the genocide, in addition to, in some instances, even contribute to the violence that took place. One of the main things that Rwanda did is to say to all these NGOs, now you're going to leave and you're going to come back in different terms, which is going to be more of I think she mentioned trade. It's going to be more of an economic or commercial or trade partnership. And that's something that I'm also seeing with maybe China. I interviewed the ambassador of China when I was in Kigali, and one thing that they were stressing, because they have more of a long-term vision, 20 years, 30 years, rather than like in the US, because of the alternate, terms for presidents. It's not really based on how a political party is looking at a future for the country. But I'm not, defending one system or another, but I'm saying that what the Chinese ambassador was telling me is that what they like when it comes to Rwanda is that Rwanda can identify their needs. So whether they're working on partnerships, on economic partnerships or trade partnerships, the Rwanda knows exactly what they want, and therefore it helps on how to put in place or how to implement these kind of programs. And in this case, it's not aid, because I think Rwanda has a potential like all the other countries in Africa. I mean, Senegal for the longest time thought they didn't have any natural resources. They ended up finding oil. And like Atiti was saying earlier, France, because they have the infrastructure, because they've been there for so long, and they have, they own all the contracts. Well, Senegal was able to probably negotiate less than we used to call Macky Sall the 15% president. He was able to negotiate only 50% for Senegalese people. And just to finish on this, there's a lot to say, but aid is a continuation of colonization, of colonialism. There's several schools, including the Milton Friedman School or the Chicago Boys School, that put in place what we call the structural adjustments that were put in place in the 90s. West Africa was the first, I would say, victim of it. Senegal is a perfect example where before the 90s, Senegal was, the University of Cheikh Anta Diop, the University of Dakar was the 18th University of France. All the, former French colonies had their students sent to Senegal, where they were learning, or they were, getting their skills and so on. And the schools were extremely good. Everybody had universal health care. But then once structural adjustment came in, structural adjustments is a mix of loans, aid, and so on. I think loans, to mention also in terms of what interests that were imposed, but it came with conditions. So whether you receive loans or aid, it comes with conditions. One condition the structural adjustment policy is put in place is privatization of services or semi-privatization of services. And today, fast forward in Senegal, education is private, healthcare is private, infrastructure is private. Therefore, if you are sick, you need to basically travel to France to receive healthcare, which means that only rich people can do that. Same for education. Public schools are completely dysfunctional, so you need to actually pay private schools to be able to receive education. So those are some of the examples of the I would say negative consequences of aid and loans and this kind of interdependence with the West, that is inadequate for what I guess Africa needs today and in the future. And in terms of sanctions, I think we discussed earlier too with Gatete, sanctions like aid, these are ways that the West only seeks to impose its own agenda. And it's not really sustainable in the long term. I'll finish on a quote by Frantz Fanon in the beginning of Black Skin, White Mask, says that decolonization is always a violent phenomenon. I think that sentence really means a lot. It means that it might be difficult to break away from an old system, but it's necessary, and it's really needed for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bujana. Very insightful. I mean, I was going to say I wish you were there at the beginning, but still relevant to have your contribution right now. So we can get Olivier and Kingsman after. Actually, Kingsman and then Olivier. Sorry, Kingsman you came after me.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Jackie, for this topic. It's really good to have you and have this great topic about Africa. Thank you also, Gatete and Bojanov and Say for the insightful analysis that they made today. It's really good to hear your point of views about Africa, Western aid in Africa. My little contribution today is I was just about to say that Western aid in Africa is more political than it's economical. That's the reason why it has been ineffective over the last 60 years. I think for me, it increases Western sphere of influence in Africa than rather increasing the quality of life of African people. I remember back in the days when I was still a student, I did the research. It was about analysis about the external aid, on Congolese economic growth. And my conclusion was so surprising that I found that the Western aid was impacting negatively the Congolese export. That means the Congolese production. And it has been revealed that Western aid has a negative impact on African production because simply it's affected in services consumption rather in investment of production in Africa. And when we say production in Africa, you will never find out they will never give you aid that will be invested in, for example, agriculture, because agriculture will be transforming Africa. But rather, they give you aid and they ask you to go buy goods and services back in Western countries, which simply means you're returning back their money and by purchasing their services, and rather investing in production in Africa. So that's the reason why it has been a cycle that never changes. The aid comes in Africa, but it returns back to Europe, and Africa remains indebted forever. And Western countries keeps getting developed over African money. They give us their money, they take it back, and we still pay interest over their money, but we don't really invest in anything. Another example, it's when they give you actually that aid to invest in anything that's agriculture or in production. It's for the goods that they need in their countries that we don't consume back in Africa. One example is like if you see countries like Cote d'Ivoire, they are like a good producer of what they call cacao, but how many Ivorian do consume actually chocolate? Most of African countries, even Rwanda, for example, they produce, let's say, coffee. But how many Rwandan consume coffee? So the aid has been tailored to maintain Africa in economic slavery rather than uplifting Africa in its own for its own independency. That was just my little contribution about that, and I thank all of you for the good topic and your analysis. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Olivier, you can take over.
Well, thank you. I would like to thank Bojamo for giving us best speech, and I like how we say that about Africa. So, my first question here is that how can Africa achieve true economic independence and sustainable development without relying on foreign aid? Because, as we can see in these days, those foreign aid had become more political than before. So I don't know how Western aid get into this, but it became more like colonial. That is what I can say. So Western aid often come up with a condition that influence African policies, economics, government. So to avoid this negative effect and ensure the true economic, like, I don't know, Africa must take those proactive steps so that we can avoid those foreign aid. So if they are willing to give us those foreign aid, they they can not make it like conditional. We don't want them to like give those money and tell us what to use those money. That is what our president always says. Give us something that we can use to develop ourselves, not to always stay poor. I don't know, but maybe this is what they always want. I don't know. So they can like actually help us to invest in different companies to develop ourselves, like Rwanda did over 30 years ago. We've been developing ourselves like over 30 years. So now they want to sabotage that. I don't know what they're getting, but we have been seeing this over those 3 years that when M23 was invading the Congo. But I don't know this, but how can Africa or Rwanda can survive this without foreign aid? That was my question. So.
You want to take it, Gatete? Take those questions. Or say, Gatete, are you there?
Yes.
No, I'm talking about Gatete.
Gazette will say one of them can respond to it.
Yeah. Olivier is also a Gatete, I think. That's why he didn't reply.
I can just add a few thoughts. I think Shay mentioned it earlier, that you start from a problem, you try to identify a problem, and then you look for a solution. I think there's so many extremely great ideas on the continent for having worked with young people in secondary schools and at the university level. There is so much potential. I mean, I did the trip now from Goma to Rubaya and realized, how much potential there is, whether it's in Masisi, like Gatete was mentioning, with the milk and cheese. And this area is extremely rich. The only thing that is needed is roads. If you had some, good roads, even if it's not concrete, if it's just flattened down and maintained a little bit, you could have so much potential in terms of development there. I mean, just think about a person owning 30 cows is already has a good economic potential for doing business. And I think it's something that I also discussed with the coordinator of the AFC. I interviewed him about 2 weeks ago, where he was saying himself that aid should be turned into development projects. If we were to give microcredits to individuals and startups and young people who, when you think about the demographics of Africa, most countries have between 50 to 70% of people around, from 18 to 30 years old. So there's a huge potential in terms of ideas, in terms of what can be done. So if we were to give small microloans to them instead of sustaining the entire continent kind of in a palliative, care, it would be so much more beneficial. I think it might be difficult at the beginning for certain services, but there are so many different ideas that can be put in place, whether it's for sustainable, development projects, such as looking at environment. Senegal, again, is a very good example where the Sahara is advancing and there's more and more difficulty to grow anything in the soil there. But if you had some projects that would, for example, push away the desert and plant trees and so on, you could have a potential of growing things and stop refraining from importing goods. I think it's mainly those who benefit from aid are also not necessarily thinking in terms of collective good, but rather in how much they can benefit personally. So through collective projects, it's possible to find ways to stop aid and change it into development projects.
Thank you very much. But Bojan, my question will be: what is the mismatch? It's as if we all know the cure, but no one is taking it. Like I've been hearing this for the last, 5, 10 years since I've got interested in this. Why is Africa not taking this period of development, of business development, entrepreneurship?
I'll let Gatete respond, but I would say it's a problem of leadership. I think Rwanda has a leader that has understood that. But my knowledge of other places on the continent is that there is that leadership that is missing. Gatete?
Yeah, so thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Right, so thank you. I will remind me to go back to Boyana. I think we need to speak a little bit more about that structural adjustment and its impact on what we call aid today and so on. So that's an important point to discuss. But for now, so as far as Rwanda is concerned, I don't know what Africa will do. I've grown weary of saying what Africa will do, because Africa, just like every other continent, is not a country. But I believe that as far as Rwanda is concerned, for example, countries like Belgium, I don't think you'll ever see Belgium saying that it has a development cooperation with Rwanda ever again. Perhaps our diplomatic relationship will be reestablished. We'll visit each other. We'll probably have one day again ambassadors in Rwanda and in Belgium, whom do not exist now. But as far as development cooperation is concerned, I think it's going to wind down, even from government support, even from NGOs. I think CTB and whatever what have you. I think this is one thing that is going to be cancelled over time. And also, the biggest exporter of minerals from Rwanda is a Belgian company. I think that contract is also going to be terminated anytime soon. And it takes maybe 65% of our minerals and sells them. So I think I think Belgium has not seen the sanctions. When we say that we have to do sanctions, I think we're going to cut our trade and business kind of ties. The only thing we cannot cut is because we have family ties. We have Rwandans who are married to Belgians, and we have Rwandans who are Belgians, and Belgians who are, then vice versa, and so on. That will remain, and diplomatic relations will be reestablished over time. But matters of development, cooperation, or trade, I think that's done. I think that's dead, and it's going to unfold in the coming days, in my opinion. As for the rest of aid, like I said, aid represents perhaps 4 to 5% of our GDP and about 10 to 15% of our annual budget. I think this is an important wake-up call that we're going to be phasing this thing out. It is useful, but it's not indispensable, and it is. And this, the moment you understand that, is the beginning of freeing yourself. And so, yeah. So the way forward is that next time we debate with anyone, we have to debate based on principles. For example, when Rwanda says, I have the right to defend myself, nobody should say yes, but if you defend yourself, I'll cut the aid. I mean, that's should be a non-starter. But of course, if someone gives you money, they hold some sway on you. And so this is going to... Africa in itself, it still has so many, the entanglement with the... So Africa, every country that will achieve revolution will have to have a fresh start. So what I'm seeing in Burkina Faso, in Mali, and in Guinea is encouraging. But also, the idea is not to undress St. Peter so that you can dress St. Paul. The idea is not to say, oh, now we're not going to... I saw the president of Burkina Faso going to Putin and telling him, oh, now you're going to help us because you're better than they, and this and that. I don't think that is the path. I think that's not the point. The point is we must remain partners with everybody else, but we are not going from one bondage to another because we don't know how to live freely and as masters of ourselves. So I believe that over time, countries that will achieve some level of revolution, the old dictators, they will go, and the young people who come, for example, and it's being achieved. So, for example, the French bases in West Africa are being shut down. The one in Senegal was shut down. The one in Cote d'Ivoire is in the process of being shut down. Cote d'Ivoire being the France of Africa. That's significant if they shut down that military base. Most of these bases were actually very adjacent to the State House. So that's how presidents used to go through a tunnel to meet with the French, and that's how they were able to maintain themselves in power. But so gradually, Africa is shaking off the yoke of colonization and neo-colonization. But as far as Rwanda is concerned, this new iteration of so-called sanctions and aid cuts and so on, I think will be the last. I think after this, we will take measures never to be dependent on anybody. Although we've been cutting it slowly every year, the Americans have eased the task by cutting US aid themselves, so that's already done. The Brits have said that they will stop. I told you this year they gave zero budget support. NGOs cannot be stopped. If NGOs want to continue fundraising from the West, they are free to do so. But NGOs are not who determines the lives of Rwandans. It's the government of Rwanda that we elect to protect us. I think the government of Rwanda will be careful next time it enters into an aid relationship with anybody else. Now, just one thing I wanted to clarify, Boyana did well to bring back the structural adjustment. So look at it this way. At the independence in the 60s, so all African countries received independence. And when they receive independence, so overnight, the international companies, the multinationals, are being chased from Africa. But African countries did not have cash to fund their development. So the West said, listen, we will give you money, but you have to embrace modernity, democracy, etc. But at the time, they called it structural adjustment. Structural adjustment meant it is the theory of Milton Friedman, who said that the only functions of the state must be police. We're talking Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, and at the time, those are the people who are in power. So we're talking about liberal capitalism at its peak. And so they say the function of the state should be police, justice, and military. The rest, you should give it to private sector. This is a Milton Friedman theory. I'm not going to take it into macroeconomics. But now, even the function of the military was bastardized because the army was colonial, the generals were still Brits and Belgians and so on. So these new leaders who were prepared, because remember, all the leaders that were prepared by Africans to lead Africa were immediately killed. You remember them or removed. Nkrumah, Sekou Touré, Sankara, you name
Lumumba.
And then when they were Lumumba, even Samora Machel later. So the only survivor was Nyerere, and now he has died. Meles, now he has died. Paul Kagame is possibly the last one of the generation of freedom fighters, but that's a different conversation. Now, they tell them you must leave the functions of the state to be police, justice, and army, which army was not even existent as well at the time. They said the rest of it must be held by private sector. But remember, Africa is coming out of independence, does not have a private sector, does not even have industry, because it was all manned by the colonialists, or it did not exist. Most of the things were imported. So what happened when they said privatization? The same colonial countries came and took over all strategic arms of the state: water, electricity, healthcare, and so on, was done by the same colonial countries. Now the colonial administrators have left, but the colonial CEOs and general managers came to replace them. But Africans said, "Oh, but we don't have money to buy all these things that are being produced by this private sector." They said, "No problem, we will give you money so you can buy." So, which is something that I want to tell you, that aid is also an opportunity to give you money so you can consume their product. This is a twisted Keynes theory that you give money to someone so that he can buy your product. But anyway, that's a different conversation again. But so structural adjustments were an opportunity to enable African economies to be captured. I'm sure some of you have heard of the. Brianna also mentioned the Chicago Boston boys, the University of Chicago, that trained people so they can go and destabilize economies in Latin America. So, for example, they would. I'm sure many of you have read The Confession of an Economic Hitman, the book. So basically, they would come into your country and capture your entire economy, but then they'll give you money to buy from their products. Because you can't afford to buy, they give you money to buy their products. So now you are indebted, but you don't even collect enough tax because all the companies are owned by colonial companies, which will do all sorts of maneuvers not to pay taxes, to avoid taxes, or to pay as little taxes as possible. The same taxes that you get is the money that you use to service the debt that they keep giving you as a drug addict. So you become addicted to aid, but you cannot even pay it off because your natural resources are controlled by foreign companies. So it's a virtuous cycle where you're supposed to be maintained in poverty. But at the time, African leaders who ever wanted to question that system I'll give you an example, and I'll conclude with that example. There's a president called Mamadou Tanja in where this new guy is in Guinea. Mamadou Tanja, Guinea has Niger, sorry. Niger has a big deposit of I wrote about it, I think. I hope if I find it, I'll share it. But I'm sharing some articles on this Spaces message platform. So, Mamadou Tanja wanted to negotiate the price of uranium. Niger having the highest deposit of uranium in the world. The uranium was being held exploited by a company called Areva. I will let everybody guess where Areva comes from. And Mamadou Tanja wanted to renegotiate the price of uranium. I can't remember the price, but it was being paid at 10% of its actual price. But Mamadou Tanja had the term limit. And so the French, this negotiation started, and the French, they dragged their feet until Mamadou Tanja's term limit was over. And at the same time, Areva funded his, what was his name? Issoufou, Mahmoud Issoufou, something like that, who was actually a director in Areva. Areva funded him to run for president in the next term. Mamadou Tanja saw Issoufou as a straw man of Areva and said, no, I'm not going to leave power. He explained to his people, he said that I'm going to conclude the negotiations on uranium. Once the prices have been established, give me one more term. I'll conclude this negotiation. Once the terms of the price of uranium has been established, then I will leave. Oh, dictature. Oh, democracy. Oh, election. Blah, blah, blah. Mamadou Tanja was forcefully removed. The man who replaced him was the director of Areva. He abandoned the discussions about uranium. The price of uranium continued to remain low. Today, I think it's only today that the new president, Mamadou Tanja, then when he was leaving, he took another director of Areva, which is the gentleman who is still under house arrest in Guinea, who continued to allow the French to exploit the uranium. And now we have a new president. I believe Areva is now going to leave so that people of Niger can sell their uranium at the price that they want. And by the way, these foreign companies, when they exploit your minerals, they do not take care of the environment. During my education in human rights, I was taken on a study tour in a place called the Niger Delta. It breaks your heart. You never the same. It's like going into hell and seeing how the conditions. You cannot plant a tree of beans or potatoes in the Niger Delta. The whole place is polluted. BP, British Petroleum came and exploited the oil and dumped all the oil waste in the open. It's a disaster place. I went to visit because in school I was doing research about Sarowiwa, who was an activist, Nigerian activist, who was killed because he was denouncing this type of thing. Of course, in Congo, nobody denounces the scrounging of their resources. It's very easy to accuse Rwanda of this. Anyway, so long story short, what I'm going to tell you about aid. Rwanda is going in the next, I'm foreseeing between now and 5 years from now, Rwanda is going to phase out aid completely. If it does, two things are going to happen. We're going to have more Western media hostility. And second, other African countries are going to start considering phasing out aid. If we resist that wave of hostilities when that happens, other African countries will say, that's it, we're also phasing out aid. So the idea is to keep demonizing Rwanda, calling it dictatorship, so that nobody ever picks up this example. This iteration of aid is actually a blessing in disguise, because Rwanda is actually taking measures now to phase out all of its aid completely. I told you it's about 10% of our national budget, which grows at the rate of 7 to 8 every year. So if aid and annual growth grow at the same level, at that point we should be able. The day we reduce 8 to 7% of our national budget, and our economy grows at 8%, which is not. We can achieve that in less than 5 years. That's the day we're going to say goodbye aid. And if we do that, then other Africans are going to follow. Just like the day Kagame cut relations with France, people thought he was going to be assassinated because no one before him had ever done that and survived. Today, it's become banal It's become a joke to tell France to go to hell. Everyone is doing it. But the past person, the pioneer of this was Paul Kagame, I think you all remember. And that is the trend. That is why you see all this criticism and pressure against Rwanda, because that we have decided that you're going to be an outlier, and we're going to, and this is actually an interesting time for us to restructure our budget, to understand, to invest more in strategic things. Just like before we used to, just like the day we cut Chagua, Mitumba, and they stopped us from being part of AGOA, now we have a flourishing textile industry, and so on and so forth. So the way forward for this, I think this is it. I think those who cut aid, I think even if they reestablish it, I don't think we will beg for it to be reestablished, because I think this gives us an opportunity also to get rid of it permanently and gradually, like that, with the rest of the countries, and remain in relations where if someone wants to come in your country and invest in something, it's fine, but it's not defined as aid. So if you are Belgium, French, American, Brits, what have you, if you want to come in Rwanda and establish a train service in a PPP, private public partnership, that is fine, but it's not going to be called aid again. We're going to have joint ventures and joint investments and so on, instead of having just aid and cry loud about it all over the media and so on. Thank you very much. I think that was it for me, and I want to take this opportunity to congratulate you, Chris, for having been elected as the head of the diaspora in France. You are doing a great job. Keep it up. All the best, and good night.
Thank you very much, Gatete, but you didn't answer my question, which was why is African countries not taking the pill? The solution that you just elaborated with, we've had them.
Did you hear Boyana? Boyana told you that Frantz Fanon said in Black Stars that decolonization is a violent phenomenon. Why do you want Ouattara, who was put in power by the French? Why would you want him to phase out this kind of partnership with the French? Why would you want Biya, who's maintained in power by the French? Why would you want him to cut relations with the French? I can give you a list of many other.
So it's political. So it's political will and up to the next generation.
Some leaders we have are not African presidents. They are colonial administrators in black skins. That's the very purpose of white skin, black skin, white mask book, which everyone here must read.
So they're imposed on their people by the imperialists.
They are not voted by Jackie. You are left with no choice. You are voted by whom? Elections are rigged. Sometimes it becomes ethnic coalitions and so on and so forth. Until the black colonial administrators are dead and buried, Africa will not. That's why Boyana mentioned this book, which everyone must read. By the way, I'm opening a library in 2 months where I will have exclusively these types of books, because I feel like there's a gap among African readership and content. So I'm opening a library in 2 months. Don't worry about it. I got you. But anyway, why Africans are not taking these steps? Listen, let me tell you, only in Rwanda is aid accounted for. Let me tell you something else, Chris. In some countries, aid comes. Tshisekedi stole 100 million of not even aid, a loan. The World Bank gave loan to the country. He took it to himself. Now the country is paying for it for the rest of its life, but he took a loan of $100 million and took it to himself. It's called, what was it called? Chileleju or Chilejeru or something, some project like that. Aid is shared, is not money. No citizens don't see the aid in most African countries. Aid is taken from an account in Washington, D.C. to an account in Zurich. Never to meet the people it was intended to. So that's why, again, if you read that book that Boyana talked about, even The Wreck of the Earth by the same author, Frantz Fanon, these books will tell you what is happening. And Dambisa Moyo's book was interesting when it was written. It's possibly still relevant today, but it's not as profound as those two books by Frantz Fanon that everyone should read: The Black Skin, White Mask and The Wreck of the Earth.
Thank you, Gatete.
And also,
I've
as
been
long as
sharing on the
just
comments.
one more thing, just one more thing. As long as we still have Oxbridge associations in Nigeria, where you say people who went to Oxford and Cambridge have as an association, so long as we still have uh, clubs of people who go to Europe and the West, as long as we still have people who sing and show off cars and bling from the West and want to wear designer clothes from Gucci and Versace and so on. By the way, look for me, Chris, another time. I'll tell you how Kwaikwamba went to New York to try and persuade people in the UN Security Council to take sanctions against Rwanda. And instead, she spent 2 days in the Fifth Avenue trying to shop in boutiques. That's a story for another time. I'll explain it to you.
That's a story for
Take
another
care.
time. I got some information about that, but when you're sharing, Kaikwamba is German, so she's doing
So take care.
so it's the reality. Thank you very much, Gatete. Let's hear from Global. By the way, for the people, I'm posting in comments the books that you guys are recommending for people to read. There is this stupid code that says that when you want to hide something from Africa, you put it in writing. So let's make it a fake thing. Personally, I've been able to read using audiobooks. I struggle to take a physical book, but I've been able using audiobooks. I use Amazon Audible, and I can read a book in a week and read it again, go through chapters. So I really recommend everyone. I bought the Dambisa Moyo book. I bought this every book you mentioned. I mean, the two books you mentioned. I just bought them. So I'm asking everyone here to do the same thing. It's very important that we read and we understand this. Like this 2% thing just made me feel like I need to go to sleep and rest. Rwanda will be fine. Anyway, global African youth inclusion. Please take on. Oh, sorry, Jackie, the host. You wanted to speak.
Oh no, Chris. No, at that point, I was just saying, as Gateta said, part of Africa's problem is some of the African countries being led by people that have been forced on their citizens by external influences, people with different interests. As we've said, nobody on the outside of Africa wishes as well. So if you have someone on the outside deciding who your president is, who the decision makers will be, then there's a problem. That is something that we've got to cut completely, and I hope that we will get there. Chris, I know we've got lots of speakers. Just before we bring them on, let me read a few comments that came through. Boyana has shared a book, The Shock Doctrine. Oh, it's a documentary. Yes. She says, Gatete, also to add on the Chicago schoolboys, the book by Naomi Klein, The Shock Doctrine, and how shocks are created to put in a place a system of capitalistic dependency. She shares the link to the documentary. Thank you for that. I see lots of comments. Chris, thanks a lot for sharing those points as they were being made. Kiapi, this foreign aid freeze and sanctions is a good thing. Our African leaders must wake up to the reality that since 1948 and World War II, the Marshall Plan is not working for us. Poverty is still here, and it will be for years to come. Professor Dirawi says, my opinion is why the world is not developing despite our progress in all, Africa rather, is not developing despite our progress in all areas, because we're different peoples and there's nothing that can unite us on one side. As you know, there are African nationalities divided into several countries, which causes hatred of each other to spread. That's fundamental. And it will be hatred between two different countries, but even hatred within the African countries themselves. And then Olivier said, my question is, how can Africa achieve true economic independence? Oh, you already asked that, and I hope that you got that question answered. And then Musini says, economic aid has rusted the African mental health and will continue to be due to the incapacity of autosufficiencies. Top on aid receiving 2024, South Sudan, Rwanda, Uganda, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Kenya. And then Ilunga says many cases are made up when Mukwege started his foundation between 2011 and 2015. The victims were paid to make fake sexual abuses and statements, commenting on what Boyana said earlier. We will have to check that for sure. But thanks a lot for being on the space. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Jackie. So the next person is global. The person using the handle Global African Youth Inclusion. I don't know if he's there. He or she.
Good evening, Africa. Can you hear
Good
me?
evening. Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
You have an
Yes,
echo.
we
If you
can.
can, you can get closer to the microphone,
All
but we
right.
can hear you. Thank you.
Good Good evening, Africa. This is Global African Youth Inclusion. It's a youth organization in the continent that is passionate about mobilizing African youth for open governance and youth inclusion. We're excited and we're privileged to be here. When we saw this space, we were very excited when we were talking about the current trends as it relates to Africa developing with themselves. We've got to many fora where such discussions about the implications of the aids from Western world. What has Africa got to learn from it? We want to posit properly that all our positions, all our articulations are all welcome, all are valid. But what we're talking about now is the political will to put into actions all these of our positions and articulations. What we need to talk about now is how can we possibly, as youths of Africa, how can we come together to galvanize support and push our heads of states and governments into action. I love what Gatete said that many of our African leaders are colonial administrators in black skins. I think we need to look into that submission properly and get to see how we can galvanize ourselves as youths, how we can galvanize ourselves as Africans, because Africa has come of age. We are tired of Western imperialism. We are tired of the poverty in Africa. We are tired. We can't take it any longer. And if we cannot take it any longer, we're going to find a probable way that we can end this and end this one for all. Whatever we're doing today, we must think of our generations yet unborn. We must think of our Gen Zs in Uganda. We must think of our Gen Zs in Kenya and Rwanda and in Nigeria. So, ladies and gentlemen, African brothers and sisters, the way forward is what do we do? How do we fashion out ways on pushing our leaders to do the right thing and make governance open for everyone to participate? It is true now, as it stands, the aids are gone and they are gone forever. We're not talking about the aids any longer. How are we going to live without these aids and harmonize the absence of these aids to do within ourselves? Today we are talking about the AFCFTA. How many of African countries have been able to present their legal instruments and ratify the protocol properly? How are we trading within ourselves? We're so excited with Rwanda. Rwanda has opened up free visa for African countries. How many African countries today have taken that step to also say, okay, we open up our country for all African countries to come in and trade and do whatever. In as much as you're an African, you have a right in other African countries. How many African countries has followed suit? This is what we're talking about. All these things are happening in Europe. It's happening in the Western world where you travel from one country to the other. You don't even know if you just traveled. So, how is African leaders and every one of us ready to work and ratify the AFCFTA and protect it and make it work? Make it work. These are our articulations. These are our position, and let's find a way. Let's find a solution. Let's stop talking. We've talked a lot. It's time for action. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day. I am Ambassador Ushi Israel. I am the Global Director of Global African Youth Inclusion. It's nice to be here.
Wow. Thank you for that point. And it's good that you're running an organization like this, Global African Youth Inclusion. I don't know what Shay and Gatete will say, but in my opinion, honestly, we need more young people getting involved in the politics of the continent, getting involved in governance, because you find sometimes when the youth are disenfranchised, they get angry, they feel left out. There are countries that have made politics expensive. The other day I was reading an article written by a young Kenyan, and he was saying, you're here criticizing me for asking for fundraising, Harambe, for raising funds in order to be able to run in the next election. But you're in denial because today you cannot run against so and so and so. He listed several people that have been in politics for years. And he says you cannot run against those people with the little money you have gotten from your startup or the 5 years that you've been working. So there are countries that have made it almost impossible. They've made it expensive. But in my opinion, the youth have to find a way of getting in. If we are tired, probably the older generation is not as tired as we are, or they got tired, they just didn't know what to do, or they were not angry enough. If we are tired and we're angry, the young people need to present themselves. When we go out, when it comes to protecting your country, defending the country, when it gets to voting for the right leaders, voting for the right policies and decisions, we should be there. There's a tendency of young people staying at the back, sometimes just deciding I will not go vote because after all that has been decided. The people that will win the election have been decided. And in that process, as you stay home, people will go out there and vote for leaders that you will not like, leaders that will come and make very bad decisions for the country. Global African, that was a good point. Shay and Gatete, do you want to comment on that before I bring in Stanley and Olivier? Okay. I guess Gatete and Shay has off a bit. Stanley, your hand is up. Could we please hear your thoughts?
Thank
I
you.
thought I'd
Can I go ahead?
Yes, please go ahead, Stanley.
Yes, thank you for allowing me to speak. So this issue of aid to the African continent is an issue that we Africans need to get away from. And when we see that for many people that have now worked with these aid organizations like USAID, Oxfam, and the rest of them, I mean, you name the rest. But when you get to work for them, you see Western corruption being packaged totally and then being transferred, like to Africa and other parts of the subcontinent. Like you find out that these people consider Africa as a dumping ground of just anything that they can create, starting from vaccines that have no scientific proof to their aid, to even the used clothes they wear and everything. And I mean, for example, Ghana. I will use Ghana as an example. They, at the IMF and the World Bank, where I used to work, and like everything I say here is not about my job, but I'm saying it as a professional. So at the World Bank, when African countries get to borrow from the World Bank, they do get to pay higher interest rate as compared to other countries. And they came up with a terminology called heavily indebted poor countries, HIPPIs. And so for them to reduce your interest rate, they try to manipulate your political system. They say, okay, you have to mingle with governance, you have to mingle with human rights, you have to mingle with these values. And when you go deep down in the values that they are talking about, it is Western value. It is about erasing the African culture. It is about destroying the African family. It is about destroying everything that the black men stand for on the African continent and to impose their values. So that's the only way you have a cheaper interest rate. And so former Ghanaian president who just left, Dr. Nana Akufo-Addo, he realized that, and at the IMF, he refused to borrow. And so Ghana economy went into sham because the previous loans and debts that Ghana had, they have to increase the interest rate. They completely undermine his government. In Liberia, one of the highest recipients of aid from the United States government, the National Election Commission of Liberia was built by the United States government, I mean USAID. The University of Liberia, half of it was constructed by the United States government. The curriculum of Liberia is written by the United States government. Now, Recently, when USAID canceled aid and they were crying all around the place, and I went through the national budget of Liberia, $1 billion, and you find out that they have 400 million, 40 million more as compared to what like what they were receiving in the aid. How do I say that? Okay, let me say it in the most simple term. That is, if Liberia's government and political elite decides to cut down wasteful spending, for example, one person's salary, in the Liberian parliament, I think it's one of the highest paid parliament in the world. They get paid 20,000 United States dollar every month. They have other benefits. Liberian government officials, some of them make the 9,000. They have gas slip, generator slip, this entitlement. And I said to them, hey, as a professional economist, if you should cut down some of your spending, you will have 40 million in excess to make up for the aid that have been called up from you. So it means that you can buy your independence and your sovereignty by just having fiscal discipline. But unfortunately, a lot of African countries, like a lot of African leaders, lack fiscal discipline. And Frank Fanon said that when the opportunity are given to the masses to elect, they always elect people that will further increase their poverty and their misery. And that is the sad thing about democracy, because democracy, you have to go through election, you have to go through, like majority rule. So at the end of the day, when the masses are illiterate, they don't know the right from wrong, they just go ahead electing the highest bidder, whoever gives them the highest amount of money. So as the new generation on the African continent, we need to go back to the drawing board and look at some of these systems that are in place, and see how we can get rid of it. Starting from our political system to our economic system, even to our educational system. Now, in Nigeria, like I live and work in the Nigeria before, I used to work there for a GT Bank. In Nigeria, their entire justice and their education system is still the colonial, and it doesn't prepare the young Nigerians for work. Even those that are prepared for work, they can't just find a job because of the skill set that have been taught in school. And this is creating multi-dimensional poverty. So these are things that Africans need to like to take a look. First thing, starting with our own national curriculum. We should control our curriculum while it's taught in school. And we should be able to explain to those on the African continent as to racism. For example, racism is not injected in our curriculum. So anti-black racism in Europe and North America should be taught on the entire African continent, should be taught in Black Africa, so that they can know that they are not accepted in these countries, and that these countries, that when they come to you, you need to give them equal treatment as they are giving your people in the West. When we start to have this mentality, then our new generation will now see, hey, that these people are not superior to us, and that the grass is not greener out there. We can make Africa like a better place. We can make it ourselves. We can trade among ourselves. We can relax tariff on a open border. All these tariff, ECOWAS tariff, like one country from another cannot trade. There is visa restrictions, and there are just a lot going on. So we need to take a look at it and hold our government more to account, and then be able to just move on. Otherwise, Africa is going to continue to remain to where they are, because the Chinese are also coming. And then let me say here, everyone hate black people. The Chinese hate us. The Arab hate us. The white people hate us. Everybody hate black people, for sure, guaranteed. There is not a single race in the world that don't have hatred for the black people. So African people, especially Black Africa, need to start to understand that and love each other, love your neighbors, open doors for trading, relax visa restriction, and then we'll start to make progress. In my university, there were a lot of students from Egypt and Libya, because they were light skinned, so they were closer to the white kids. Until when they get discriminated against by the white kids, and then they come to us Black African for our African solidarity. And then we're like, no, this don't work this way. You don't see yourself as an African. You think that you are an Arab, or that you are a European or something. Until when you become victim of racism in a so-called, light-skinned group, then you want the African solidarity. These are things that we need to work on to hold our leaders more and more to account. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stanley. Thank you. And I think that should bring this conversation to an end. I never expected it to go on for this long. Chris, I'm sure you also didn't. Chris had an emergency, and so he had to fall off his course. I'm sure you also didn't expect it to go on for this long. Thank you so much. Stanley says, sometimes when this is happening between Africa and the European Union, would say, well, we have the European Union, let's run towards BRICS, let's run towards, I don't know. But what Stanley has said is nobody loves us, nobody will be having your best interest at heart. The Chinese hate you. He says you'll be thinking, maybe let's leave this other side because they don't like us. They've shown us they don't like us. Let's go to the other side. But even the other side is not any better. Stanley also says it's upon us to change the things that affect us. He insists that we should start by changing the curriculum. Thank you for emphasizing that, Stanley. You've said a lot of things. A lot has been said on this space, and I do hope that you who has stayed with us all through has picked the message that was intended for you. We wanted to dissect the issue of Africa and Africa creating its own path in this world of Western aid and sanctions. And we do hope that you have picked something. Boyana insisted earlier that aid is extremely beneficial to the people that insist and announce that they give us aid more than the receiver. And as Gateta said, the beggar in this story is not Africa, it is someone else. I wanted to conclude, but I can see Olivier has put his hand up. Olivier, is there something you want to say before we say goodnight?
Yes, there is something that you said about how Gen Z can actually get involved in politics. So many of the people don't want to get involved in politics, but the reason why they want, I don't think they can get involved in politics because some of the people, like, they can mess things up because many people have studied engineering, computer science, and so on and so forth. I think many people that have studied like laws or something, they can all actually get involved in politics. But as a Gen Z, we can actually come to social media like Twitter, Instagram, and say about our countries. So we can say what is the best of our countries, fight for our countries on social media or something, because all of men thinks about lies of men. Yeah, I've seen a lot of men things that is not good on our president, on our countries. Our country is caring, but deep down I know men no soldiers inside there because where I am now, I'm at the border of between Burundi and Rwanda, and there is a soldiers there. We get time to talk and and share ideas, and they keep telling us that there is not our soldiers there, but we may have seen them, but there's no our soldiers there. But what I want to say is that as Gen Z, we have to come to social media and fight for our country because this is where many lies are being spread. So as a Gen Z, I think I'm a Gen Z too. I think as a Gen Z, we can come up to social media to fight for our countries because many people get fed for this information on this social media. I think that's we have many people around here. You can actually please fight for this country because I know how lie can be hard, and I know how lie can destroy something that was very nice. Thank you. Good night.
Good night, Olivier. I believe we can be everywhere. We can come, oh, well, I'm not a Gen Z, but I believe you can do your work online and on the ground as well. Thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure hosting this space, the longest space that I have hosted. I can see our speakers have fun enough. Sylvie, thank you, darling. Thank you. Thank you so much for the support, for staying here all through. Keza has also been around the whole time. I want to say thanks. Elizabeth, thank you for joining the conversation. Many of you, all of you that have stayed with us until now, thank you. Even those that fell off earlier, We appreciate them. Boyana, it was great to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much. And let's keep this conversation going. Whenever we have a topic that we'd love to discuss, we'll put it out there. And we do hope that you will always make it a point to join us. We have AFCFTA, and we hope that our countries will be doing something about it. Enough of the talk. Africa seems to talk and talk and talk and do less of acting. We do hope that as we move forward, as these experiences come, sanctions come, the threats, we do hope that we will start acting and stop talking, or do the talking, but just a little bit. Let it be surpassed by the acting. Thank you so much. We had Gatete, we had Shay, and I had my co-host Chris Renzao. I can see my other Chris saying 100. Thank you, Chris and Amarasa, for having joined us. It's been a pleasure. May you guys have a good night and a great week ahead. God bless you. Thank you so much.